Hello, everyone. How is everybody today? I hope you're doing well. Can somebody give me a thumbs up in the chat if you're hearing me clearly? Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Reverend. Good afternoon to you.
Si Abraham there. Si Abraham.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. D. Grant, Dion, Lorraine, Maddens, Marilyn, Stacy Ann. Welcome, Charmaine. Bethune, Seabell, Abigail Toussaint. I remember this name. Welcome. Maddens, Marilyn McCoy. Thank you so much. I hope everyone is seeing and hearing me clearly. Good afternoon to you all. Right, while we wait on the others to join in, thank you. Yes. Could you share what industry or organization you're tuning in from? So that's why we have a feel of the range of persons that are here with us today. Health, right, great. Anybody else represented? We have health in the house. Who else is here with us? NEPA, oh, nice. Agriculture.
That I come up right away. You are connected to computer audio, but I'm not hearing anything.
Heart, NSTA Trust, Jam Pro. Hey. Mr. Savage, how are you in two meetings at the same time? But welcome.
Just like you're in two meetings at the same time.
We're cloning ourselves here.
Yes,
Industrial
yes,
Automotive Parts. Yes, welcome. Sheila Smith from Sangster's Bookstore. So we have in a wide cross section of persons. What else do we have in the house with us today? I want John to know exactly, the right range of persons that he's talking to. So we have the Jamaica Promotions Organization, JAMPRO. We have NEPA. We have an NGO serving people with intellectual disability. Marilyn McCoy, welcome, Marilyn. Thank you for being here. Right, this is a topic that touched so many, a wide cross section of industries. Tax Administration of Jamaica, Nardia Brian Jackson. Welcome, Nardia. Right, so tell us more. Is that everybody so far? All right. So we are very happy to have you all with us this afternoon. And I guess others will join in as we continue. We love that you have spent your time with us. So, without much further ado, I'm going to start off our session today, right? So a formal welcome, everyone, to this our lunchtime brown bag session. So, we chose to have brown bag sessions because we know that things are changing very rapidly in the space. People have less time. So we have reduced the time period of our forums and trying to see how best we can get a smaller group of persons so that they can have these interactive discussions, pain points that are affecting persons today. And the topic we are considering is securing productivity and operational efficiency with flexible work arrangements. Now, we have all been touched or affected over the last 2.5 years, if we want or not, with this very topic. And if you go to our YouTube channel, you know, we have a number of resources. We have discussed this topic about twice already, where we had various industries commenting, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, who we are representing today, also represented. So there are a lot of resources that we have already out there that you can tap into, right? But today we have a specialist with us, and we're going to talk to him a little bit more. A few of you have already registered and shared your questions, and we have those that we are going to dive into. So in terms of how we're going to operate today, I want everybody to, you know, utilize the chat. We have our co-host from the center here in the chat. And what we're going to do is try to maximize the hour that we have, our list that we have with you. So some of the questions we'll also answer in the chat, and some will be fed straight to John through the question and answer section, all right? So in the chat, you will see a number of resources. So if you look to the right, you will see 3 dots where you type in, click on that. You can save the chat. At the end of this meeting, you will have all of those discussion and resources that you can go back to. So we'll be sharing links and answers to questions, etc. in the chat. So please, you know, feel free to have the dialogue and the conversation in the chat, because the mics will be muted for the most part, so that we can really get and hone into the information that John Messenger will be sharing with us today. So in terms of why we are here, you know, John spoke at one of our webinars last year, one of the forums that we had last year, and we were hindered tremendously by technology. And I can tell you that John has told me that he has been having nightmares since then and couldn't wait to redeem himself, to come back and really share with us, you know, his knowledge, skills, and wisdom in the area of flexible work arrangements. Granted, it's a short time, so we're going to make the most of it, but we just want to thank the persons that were able to sponsor this initiative. Of course, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, who we are a department of, Flow Foundation, as well as the Hugh Lawson Studies Institute for facilitating this discussion today. And at this time, I'm going to introduce Mr. Messenger. So while I do so, John, can you please share your screen with us? So, I mean, share your,
Voila.
there you are.
I said voila
Welcome.
because I'm teleworking from France, actually. I work in Geneva, as you're probably going to say, but I work only in Geneva half the time. And the other half the time I work from France, from another country, that's all. It happens to only be an hour away from Geneva. So I'm practicing what I'm preaching.
And what time is it by you now, John?
7:38 in the evening. So I'm working a little bit of overtime today because of this, which is not my preference, let me tell you, but it has to be done sometimes.
All right, and we're happy to have you. So just to tell you a little bit about John. John is the team leader of the Working Condition Group with the Conditions of Work and Equity Department of the International Labour Office in Geneva. That is the headquarters of the International Labour Organization. So John is responsible for ILO's work program on working time, work organization, and work-life balance. He specializes in policy-focused research, policy advice, and technical assistance on all these subjects on both the international and the national levels, with a particular interest in issues relating to work time flexibility, new and evolving forms of work organization, such as telework, ICT, mobile work, work sharing, and gender issues in working time. Prior to joining the ILO, John in 2000 worked with the US Department of Labor in Washington, DC, where he served as team leader for research on its employment and training administration. So John is no newbie to this. He has been doing this a long time before many of us have heard the terms flexi work and work arrangement. And he's the author and editor of a number of publications, the latest of which is Telework in the 21st Century, an Evolutionary Perspective, which was published in 2019, even before the pandemic hit. So, you know, and there's a lots of demand on this time, so we're very happy to have him here with us. And without further ado, John, welcome again.
My pleasure, Tamar. My pleasure. I have to pick up on what you said briefly because we did have problems with technology the last time. We're all hostages of our internet connectivity these days. And I'm sure it's not perfect situation in Jamaica either, but you would think France is a highly developed economy, it would be perfect, but this is not Paris. I'm out in the middle of the countryside next to with a horse field on one side, a cow field, a donkey behind the house across from the street who brays all the time. I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and trying to do work with the whole world from here is not always easy. And the technology is only, as the French say, comme ci, comme ça. It's sometimes okay and sometimes not. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it works today. So far, so good.
All right, it's gonna happen, John. So we're happy for that. And the same on our side, you know, so it comes with the pros and the cons. But let's talk about flexi work, just to start us off.
Yeah.
Right? It really became real to us. And, you know, we have heard the term work from home, hybrid, flexi time, flexi work. Break it down for us. Are these all the same things, interchangeable? You know, what are some of these work options that are available? Because sometimes they tend to lock into just one or two.
That's an excellent question, Tamar. Really, I didn't see that in your list, but that's a really excellent introductory question, because really they're not all the same animal. I mean, I would categorize for a lot of them, they're really working time arrangements. They're how you organize working time. And the thing is, people tend to think of working hours as just how many hours a week do you work? But that's only half of the working time equation. The other half of the working time equation is what we call working time arrangements, or in North America, both in the US where I worked and Jamaica, it tends to be more called work schedules. In Europe, it tends to be called working time arrangements, but same thing. It's how you organize hours, and it's not the same. I mean, people think, oh, 40 hours is 40 hours. No, 40 hours is not 40 hours. It can be organized 5 days with 8 hours a day. It can be organized 4 days. I saw one of the questions with 10 hours a day. It can be run during the day, but it can just easily be run as night work. You might not work 9 to 5. You might work 12 midnight to 8 a.m. That's the same 40 hours, but it's a totally different way of organizing the working time. So you got all these different kinds of working time arrangements, like flexi time and compressed work weeks and averaging working hours and a whole bunch of different things. That this is not overtime. It's not number of hours. This is how you organize them. And you got all these different kinds of time arrangements. Time banking was heavily used in a lot of European countries where they put time into accounts like bank accounts. And you can draw the time out the way you would draw money out of a bank account. But the supervisor and the individual have to agree on it. Working time accounts, or time banking, they call it. They call it time bank because it's like a bank. You work more than so many hours. Instead of getting overtime, you get to bank the hours, which you get to take as paid time off, which frankly sounds pretty nice, you know, to me.
It does, that you can withdraw it when you need it, and you can put in extra when you can.
That's the key, which is why it has to be structured right. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, which is why how you do it matters a lot. I say this and that and this and that. Oh, and telework, of course. Everybody knows telework now, or remote work, as it's sometimes called. People get them confused because they're used like they're the same thing, but they're not. Remote work is a bigger category. Telework is remote work done with information communication technologies. I am performing remote work, but I'm performing telework remote work. You can do remote work without any ICTs. It's still remote work. You know, you can work from home without any ICT. You can work, at home, not from home. That's the distinction. Working, it sounds like a play on words, right? But working at home has been done since, farmers work at home. You know what I mean? I mean, the guy back here with the cows, he works at home. You know, actually, I think they're bulls because he takes them off to be slaughtered every year. I don't think they're cows. I think they're bulls, but still, I mean, they change every year. They're not the same ones. But I mean, he works at home, but he's not doing what I'm doing.
Right.
Working from home means using your home via ICTs to project yourself out of your home into the broader world. And that's my sort of, I'm sorry, it sounds kind of a long answer, but it's a complicated question. There are all these different pieces, but telework's not a working time arrangement per se. It's broader than that. It's a work arrangement that organizes working time basically the way that employees would prefer normally. At least that's what I recommend, which is something we talked about at the last session. The key of having the workers have the ability to organize their working hours according to their needs, their personal needs, and doing that in a way that benefits companies, businesses, government, any organization, because you have concrete results and the workers are accountable for these concrete results. They're not accountable for sitting in a chair. I could sit in this chair, you know, for 8 hours a day and do nothing, or play a computer game, or watch crap on the screen, watch my favorite NBA team, you know, I mean, and what would that accomplish? It matters what I achieve. And that's what we're about here.
It's the same thing in the office, right? So you can in a chair 8 hours, but it's based on the outputs and the outcomes. That's important. And we'll get back to that, John. But thank you so much for dissecting that a little bit. And I really love the idea of that bank account where we can put in and take out, because in some cases you can't get paid for overtime, but it's good if you know, we can have that flexibility, which we are speaking of at this time, right? And this is something that you have been watching even prior to the pandemic. And we know that the pandemic has led to an increase in the incidence of these arrangements. You know, what were some of the reasons, even pre-pandemic, driving this whole movement of flexible work?
Well, you know, this is something I think that's been really discussed a lot. One of the things you have to understand is, and one of the things which I kind of faced early and had to really learn, was flexibility is not flexibility is not flexibility. Okay. There are different flavors of flexibility that benefit different, you know, basically different constituents or different groups. There are forms of flexibility that are very much driven by employers' needs. I'm not suggesting that flexibility or any kind of working time arrangement should not be based on partially employers' needs, but you also need to consider employees' needs as well. And the problem has tended to be that flexibility tends to be a one-way street. There are, however, already in many places in the US government where I worked, okay, in the Department of Labor. I worked for 15 years, from 85 until 2000 when I went to the ILO. And we had a very, very progressive flexi-time arrangement with a very small time bank, not a big one, where you could bank up to 24 hours in any 2-week period to be taken off later. Of course, you had to get the agreement of your supervisor to take off the time. But so what? You simply negotiated that. I mean, I'm not saying you always get what you want, but the idea is it's not unilateral. It's a negotiated arrangement, there's a structure to it, and it's designed to benefit both workers and employers. And in fact, I have a guide out, and I apologize. I realize now I didn't just get the link, but you can easily search up the link to this. I mean, in addition to my telework guide we talked about during our session last year, I mean, there's also a guide I developed on what I call balanced working time arrangements. What do I mean by that? Working time arrangements, including flexible working time arrangements that are balanced. They are designed to simultaneously, it sounds tricky, and it is, but it can be done, simultaneously meet the needs of both workers and employers. They're designed from the perspective of both, and often designed collaboratively within an organization, including groups of managers and workers on teams that I talk about how you do it too. This guide will tell you not just what kind of arrangements there are, but which way to structure the arrangements. It's called the Guide to Developing Balanced Working Time Arrangements. I put it out, I think it was 2018. It's on the ILO, but please, for any of these things, I'd rather not have you search our website. That sounds terrible, but the ILO has something to learn in terms of making its websites easy to navigate, okay? The best
What we
thing
will
to do
do,
is
we will share it with persons.
search online.
Yes.
You're going to share the link. You can easily
yes, we
find
can
it.
share the link. Yes, we will
Easily
share
find.
it. But thank you for
I
that.
could search it too. I could search it too, but I'd rather focus on answering the questions.
No, that's what we wanted to do, to add value to who are listening in today. And we will share the link. Persons can contact us, and if you find it before, we'll put it in the chat. But I like what you just said about that whole matter of balance, right? And since this thing started a long time before the pandemic, it looks like it's something that will still be around even post the pandemic, right? A survey that I will share, let me just quickly share this, that was conducted. Are persons seeing this? Yeah. Right. So a survey that was conducted by us in 2020 showed that, you know, alternative work arrangements, persons had different views in terms of, you know, the efficacy of these arrangements. And 43% said that it was very effective. Another 49 says it's somewhat. You had 6% which were saying that, you know, somewhat ineffective, and then 2% were saying that, oh no, it's not effective any at all. And then there were some factors that, you know, could inhibit the transition to a flexible work arrangements. And persons were saying the biggest one was infrastructure, was a big inhibitor to flexible work arrangements. And next to that was mindset. The question I have for you, what were some, and this was in the Jamaican context in 2020, what were some of the greatest challenges to implement in telework across the globe that you observed based on your work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I first just, could I ask you a quick question for clarification?
No
I understand what they mean by mindset, but what do they mean by infrastructure? Physical equipment, like information technology
equipment, technology, you know, the space, etc.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I would absolutely agree with you. I mean, the issue of infrastructure is one of the issues I cover in my teleworking guide that I did for the ILO, which is called the Teleworking During the COVID-19 Pandemic and Beyond, a practical guide that I know you already shared with the participants from the last session. But it's out there. That's what's the right word? It's teleworking is just, it's really something where you've got so many different things to consider, and it's so difficult atypical from the typical way of management that it's hard. I mean, I don't want to be too critical, but I think it's hard for a lot of managers to get their heads around it because they're used to managing by walking around. We call it management by walking around, but that's kind of what they're used to. You know, it doesn't work with teleworking. In fact, it backfires because if you try to do it that way through electronic surveillance, you actually create distrust and you actually cut your productivity. This is about raising productivity.
Yeah.
When workers don't trust their managers, when workers aren't going to be motivated for their managers, workers aren't going to perform. So you got to think about how what you're doing affects the mindset of the workers. So the mindset of the manager might be, you know, I'm not really comfortable with this, but, you know, if it's really something that you want to achieve, if what you're about is achieving results, right? This is the productivity center, right? I mean, your webinar, it should be about results, okay? So if doing something which maybe you're not comfortable with, if going beyond your mindset of, I really need to keep my eyes on this person to be sure they're working and actually focus on what they produce. If you set the right targets, you'll know whether they're slacking or not. You won't have to question. You know what I mean? You'll see. Are they delivering their deliverables or not? On the dates required, at the level of quality required? If you've got that all, you know, down, Why do you care? If they want to do it at 3 in the morning, why do you care? What you care about is getting those results at the level you want, at the quality you want, at the time that you want, isn't that what it matters, right?
That's exactly what matters. I mean, we're in a session this morning that the topic of trust was key in terms of affecting productivity. And if that's not there, then it's going to be a hindrance to growth and productivity within your teams, within your organizations. And, you also touch on another point that persons were interested in terms of that management by walking around and just needing to just see people sitting in a space versus the results and the outcomes. How can we shift that that mindset in terms of how we lead our teams to make flexible arrangements work, that we shift, what are there any resources, are there any tips? How can we make that transition to where we really need to be?
Okay, well, there's so many things to do, but I want to make sure not to forget our training course at the end, because we've developed a training course on all this stuff in collaboration with the ILO's Turin Center. So the answers I'm giving you now are going to be very, very broad brush, but if you want more detail, sign up for the training course. It's an online course. You don't ever have to leave Jamaica.
Is it a free course, or is it?
I think there is a cost because Turin, our training center in Turin, they pay for everything, including their staffing, through payments, that they receive for participants, but it's not high. It's not very expensive,
right.
Because we develop all that content for them for nothing. So they're not paying for the development of content. They're just basically paying for their own overhead costs, their staff costs, their costs.
Right.
So,
So,
but the bottom line is that would give you all the details. Would you like me to just give a broad brush? How do we change mindset, right?
That's a broad brush. Broad brush. That's based on the time that we have.
I would say the key is to get managers focused on results. It has to really, I think, start from management. And there's some workers who might not be comfortable with that either. I've talked with workers who weren't terribly in favor of that, because right now they just have to come in for 8 hours a day, put in their time, and everything's okay. I mean, but that's not good enough, right? That's not what matters. So I think the key is to start by establishing a results-based management system within your organization and making it, that's not easy, that's hard, and making it work all the way down to the bottom.
So Andrea Jones-Bennett agrees with you in terms of management missing the mark of focusing on results, focusing on times at the desk. So she thinks you are on point with that. Thank you for that comment, Andrea. Right, and I'll just share again some other feedback that we got, a survey that we did in terms of the differences. We saw people who believe that flexible work arrangement in productivity because they felt that more was done from home, that there is work-life balance, that staff were more motivated, there was higher accountability, fewer distractions, there were more efficient methods to collaborate. And on the flip side, we also saw persons that didn't believe that productivity increased because they couldn't share confidential files, inconsistent monitoring of activities, lack of discipline, the infrastructure wasn't in place, the amount of work, they didn't do the same amount of work, there were no changes that were made. So it's extreme in terms of how persons viewed their productivity working from home or in the office. And we also saw a difference too in terms of employer and employee and how they view it. What is it that you are seeing from your side? Why this divide in terms of does it work, does it really work, and the employer perspectives?
Okay, well, you're sharing the Jamaican perspectives, right?
Yes, yes, this was a Jamaican perspective.
I mean, a broader perspective that I've seen, I mean, in general, overall, globally, this has worked very well from the perspectives of both employers and workers. I mean, it's overwhelmingly been a positive experience overall. Not to say there haven't been problems, not to say it wasn't a bumpy road at the beginning. It most certainly was. And I said this at the webinar last year. And if you were on the webinar last year, I apologize for repeating myself. But in March 2020, everybody got dropped in the deep end of the pool and nobody taught us how to swim. Or whenever your first lockdown was in Switzerland and France, it was March 2020. I mean, and basically a bunch of people who'd never worked from home before in their lives had to work from home full time. And a bunch of managers who never had managed remote teams had to manage remote teams full time. And that's like the worst case possible scenario. So all you could do was try to start swimming, but it would be really helpful to have swimming lessons before you have to swim. I did well because I was an expert swimmer. I would say on this subject, I was Olympic level, you know? And so I could swim well, but I saw so many people, I mean, really barely surviving. They didn't know how. First of all, many didn't have the right IT tools, which is death, which will kill you. And then if you had the right IT tools, didn't have the right internet. When I moved from an apartment in Switzerland out to my house in France that I've been renovating, the difference was staggering because in Geneva, they have fiber optics and internet is simultaneous and it almost never goes down and it's totally reliable. I could log on exactly the second that I was supposed to come on and it would come on immediately without a hitch all the time. And out here, every single webinar is an adventure. You know, I never know what's going to happen. And this is a developed country. So in Jamaica or God forbid in Africa or parts of Asia and Latin America, you know, in the Andes or something, I mean, God knows how they can cope with this stuff.
Right,
But it's all these things that we had to go through. And workers were overwhelmed by the lockdowns. Women in particular had a very rough time because they were trying to manage homeschooling, you know, and do work at the same time. And it was just too much. And everybody was all together in the same space. And then people wonder why domestic violence went up. That's well known. Domestic violence went up substantially during the pandemic. And it was blamed. I read people blaming it on telework. Excuse me. I mean, you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It was the pandemic and the lockdowns, which forced everybody into total social isolation, which is not normal for human beings, that created this problem. You know, the fact that we did anything at all was almost a miracle because most people weren't ready for it. And yet, overall, most employers and all the surveys I've seen, there's going to be a new one out very soon from The Economist. So keep an eye out. I actually did some interviews for that. I mean, but globally, it's been a huge success, but it wasn't because it was easy. It was because organizations worked at it over a period of almost 2 years in some cases to get it right.
Right. So it's a continuous process. We can't just end it and say, okay, it didn't work, but there are things that we can do. There are resources that are available that we can tap into. And D. Hunter said in the chat that, you know, especially as it relates to trust, that, you know, if you are aware or suspicious of mismanagement of time by the staff, then, you know, there could be some problems there. So there's balance is needed, you know, in terms of how we work from home and in the workplace. So thank you for that.
And this comment from Michael Ann Urquhart is really quite on point as well, because she's talking about the explosion in teleworking during the pandemic. I mean, I call it the teleworking tsunami. I and my colleague at the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions call it a teleworking tsunami. It was enormous. In Europe, in some countries, they had a 2,000% increase.
So the question that we have next, and this ties in nicely, is that do we foresee these levels remaining, or will there be a return to pre-pandemic work? Because we are seeing in Jamaica where, you know, restrictions are lifted and pretty much, you know, some have maintained, but a lot have, you know, put it aside and gone straight back to in-person work. So what are you seeing on a global level? Do you see, what are the
Well,
trends observed
on the
there?
global level, and like I said, I mentioned again, it's not that I'm trying to give publicity to The Economist, but this is going to be such a fascinating report. I've seen some preliminary results. I'm absolutely prohibited from talking about it whatsoever because I've seen data in complete confidence because they interviewed me twice for this thing over the course of a year. I mean, but let's just say that will give you the details. But what I can tell you just from what's already out there publicly is overall, this is going to continue at a much higher rate than during the pandemic. The model is going to be hybrid, which I thought initially last year, that's now almost certainly been confirmed. Many large companies, IT companies have led the way, not surprisingly, but many other companies too. I have a friend who used to be an intern of mine who works at a big IT company, and they basically said, they don't really care where you work from anymore because they've gone to a pure results approach. They don't care. You deliver. If you don't deliver, if you repeatedly don't deliver, you'll probably get fired. But as long as you deliver, they don't really care about the details. And this is the way the world is going. Although I think it's going to be more, from what I've seen, like part of the time in the office, part of the time working remotely, which may or may not be from home. And that's because I still think, and a lot of people, I mean, I can't say this is a random sample, but I've talked to so many people over the last 2 years, so many people in all parts of the world. And I think there is still some reluctance, on the part of employers, but it's been slowly getting overcome when they've seen that the results are there. And the more that the results are there, the more comfortable they feel with doing it. So I'm guessing that maybe in Jamaica, it's because you haven't had the positive results, or you haven't had as positive results as you might have hoped for, that there's more reluctance. And if that is, I don't know if that's true, it's just a hypothesis, but if it would be true, then that means I think that one ought to consider figuring out how to do this in a more effective way and getting the training that I keep emphasizing. I did in our teleworking guide too. Both workers and managers need training on how to do this. It's not the same as working in the office. The tasks are the same, but it's not the same. And so therefore, I think both workers and managers need training, and managing a remote team is really a challenge, and you need to know how to do it effectively. And if you do that, I think it's going to be effective. I think it's going to be, you're going to get the effectiveness, you're going to get the results. There's so many studies and things, preliminary ones now already showing this, and it's already happening. It's already out there, and it's such short period. It's going to be more. But I think people have realized that part of the time in the office is necessary for human interaction. I mean, face-to-face interaction. I mean, and that is hard to do via Zoom. It's even though I like that we can do this, and otherwise we probably couldn't do it at all. It would be so much better if I was in the same room with you, Tamar, and all these people were in the same room. It would be a much richer experience. I've done so much training, and now I do virtual training. There is an element when it's the human part of the equation. There's an element that's missing with teleworking. But for focusing on tasks, when I'm doing research, writing, analysis, I mean, and I have to do a lot of that work. When I'm working right now, I'm writing a global report on working time. I can't do it in the office. The days I go into the office, I'm almost unable to do it because I'm always pulled into something else, unless nobody's in the building because everybody's working remotely. So all these factors can play into it. And globally, though, the hybrid work is clearly the way forward. And keep a lookout for that Economist. It's called the Economist Intelligence Unit putting out this report. It should be out any day now. And it's going to be very interesting because they have the data. They have the data.
Right.
That can put what I've told you what I know anecdotally, but they've done a global survey, but not everywhere. But North America is part of their global survey. So I mean, I don't know if I can't remember if they surveyed Jamaica or not, but it's going to be very interesting.
We're going to keep track of that and make sure that we send it out to those who are in our database, so that, and so you can reach out to us and we can share the link with with you when that comes out. But what I'm hearing from you is that we can't just have an ad hoc approach, but we really need to set up a system for managing the results and not micromanaging. And this may really depend on the nature of work. In the chat, as I said before, guys, those listening in on Zoom, click on the 3 dots, save the chat.
That's interesting.
Michaela has already shared the link to the ILO workshop that was mentioned. So that's a great resource that John just mentioned. So you want to tap into that course on working times and teleworking, because we all need to be trained to really thrive in this new dispensation, and it can be done. Right. So what we are hearing too is that hybrid is the way to go, and that things will remain. One of the things, if you are switching between programs, I know a lot of us were working from home, John, and we created a work from home plan. Shouldn't there be like a return to work plan? Is that necessary, or what are the implications, if any, if you had an arrangement and then it just ends suddenly? Is there any impacts? Have you seen anything with that?
Yeah, I definitely think if you've been doing this full time, then you need a return to work plan. If you've only been doing this partially, then you probably don't, but this is another issue. I don't want to digress too much, but it also depends whether your job can be performed remotely. If you have a situation in Jamaica, like I see David Wan mentioning that there's 65 to 70% of occupations in Jamaica can't be done remotely: cooks, drivers, nurses, factory floor workers, electricians, and that might very well explain part of the issue. I mean, that's possible. And it also depends on technology. That's another part of the issue. If you don't have sufficient technology, it's not going to work. But occupational structure, quite rightly, Mr. Wan says that that's an issue. That certainly is an issue, because not every occupation is teleworkable. I don't believe that is a word that actually exists in the English language, but I made it up. So I'm hoping it'll get into the dictionary one day, but I'm using it anyway. Teleworkable. And not every occupation is. Your occupation is, Tamar, mine is, and probably a lot of these other people, their occupations are too. There's a lot more than people think, including clerical workers. People, your typical secretary, clerical workers is as a remote worker, as a teleworker? Absolutely. Why? Because their occupation requires that ICTs, everything they do almost, phones, computers, etc., all requires ICTs. I mean, so secretaries, clerical workers in general are very suitable in general for telework. So it's not just for, that's one of the good things about the pandemic, is telework is not just for the elites anymore. It's been more democratized, but we got to make it work, because of course companies and governments aren't going to keep with it if they can't get the results.
Exactly. It's all based on the results and the outcome. And, so as we are seeing, and based on what you're saying and David has said, is that, there are likely some characteristics of those who will continue to have flexible work arrangements and work from home. And what arrangements we choose really depends on what's best for our teams and our organizations. You agree with this, John?
I'm sorry, Tamar. I was looking at one of the other. I was looking at the chat, and I missed that a little bit. Sorry, because
I was just reiterating a point you made. If you want to comment on what is there in the chat, please feel free to do so.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry, Tamar. I was focused down because it's very interesting looking at the profile of work from home workers in Latin America and the Caribbean. I saw a lot of women, and that's not at all surprising. Yes. Not at all surprising.
Right.
Because working from home has classically been more likely to be female, whereas telework overall has been more likely to be male. But it's been male mobile workers, men who are working all over, moving around, like sales workers, and a lot of them tend to be men. It's simply a statement of fact. And they're moving all over the place. And that's telework too. Mobile work, ICT, mobile work that we talked about in our famous Working Anytime, Anywhere report from 2017, my colleague Oscar Vargas from Eurofound and I mean, we talked about these ICT mobile workers, and they're mostly men, and they tend to have more problems than the people working from home. So, and it tends to be more women working from. Is it surprising? Women who have family responsibilities find this something that's more attractive if they could organize their work schedules around their personal needs. That's key. And if you can, then it becomes a very desirable flexible work arrangement.
Great. And there are many benefits to that, you know, and it really doesn't depend on the time in which you're doing it once you have the outcomes. And again, it depends on the kind of work. But we see D Hunter saying that they are seeing some great benefits learned using virtual platforms for meetings, less travel, less traffic, and that's good, and more practical in some instances. So we need to continue to improve on this. Thank you, D Hunter, definitely. At this time, I want to ask persons if they have any specific questions, type it in the chat so that we can ask John these as we, you know, wrap up our, you know, lunchtime session. We have a few minutes, and, you know, if there are any burning questions that you have, you know, please share it. Yes, please share any questions that you may have. In the meantime, let me see if there are any questions here.
Okay.
All right, so no, Brittany has shared a post-evaluation survey in the chat, so you can fill that out. You know, should employees who can work remotely be allowed to do so? That was one question that was asked. You know, for someone who signed up for the session. And I think that's a it depends kind of answer, right, John?
Yeah, well, I think that is kind of an it depends answer, but generally speaking, I think that the answer is yes. The question is whether or not you have the proper equipment and the organizational structure, you know, and as you say, part of it is the mindset to make that happen. And I would personally challenge any employer out there to really think about this seriously. I see something about how do companies maintain camaraderie, company spirit, culture, etc. We don't see each other except on screen. That very good point. And the answer is that's why hybrid work is the best way forward for the reasons I just said. You do need that. And we need socialization too. We missed that. That's why we had so much many mental health issues during the pandemic. We missed that. So of course you do. So that's what you should do when you're in the office. You shouldn't be doing all this other crap, excuse me, but you shouldn't be wasting your time on everything you can do remotely. Why should you be writing any reports or documents or preparing anything like that, or doing any analysis or research or any of that kind of work, anything you can do yourself individually, you should do remotely. That's how you get the highest productivity. And that has been shown by study after study. But you're right, David. You can't, Mr. One, you can't replace that. So that's what we've missed with full-time teleworking. And that's why hybrid is the way forward. And I just can't really say any more about that because it gives you the best of both worlds. Now, how you do it, that's a tricky business because you can do hybrid. There's probably thousands of ways to do hybrid. I mean, I can think of, right off the top of my head, I can think of dozens, right off the top of my head, without even thinking about it.
Give us two examples.
Oh, well, you could do it 2 days a week, every week.
Mm-hmm.
You could do it 1 day a week, every week. You could do it 3 days a week, every week. You could do it, 1 day every 2 weeks, 2 days every 2 weeks, and how you organize it. You can have people in the office on certain specified days. Okay, you can have everyone in the office, which I think is a good idea, on certain day. And you can have other days that are flexible days, and then workers could choose how they do that. I mean, I mean, they could actually choose the flexible days they wanted. But I think a key thing is that you want to get or you can have, I've seen models, but I don't like them. All telework one week and all in the office the next week. I think that's a poor model, but I've seen it. I've seen it. I mean, I think you need to have some days, this is what I think, of telework each week, and some days of work in the office each week, generally speaking. I mean, and certainly meetings and any other, if you have some kind of awards ceremonies, or if you have certain company-wide events where the CEO or the president or whoever speaks, or you want to be in person.
Or some team building activities, which is still
Team building
important.
activities, and I personally think training is much better in person. I mean, my area when I was at the U.S. Department of Labor wasn't actually work arrangements. Wasn't working hours and telework and all that, but there's some overlap. It was training. It was employment training. So training is in my blood, I mean, and I miss that interaction. I can't get out there. I love it. I mean, in a training session and going right in the middle, putting myself, some people hate that, but I like putting myself right in the middle of the room with breakout groups all around me and literally going around, almost like I'm emceeing a show and talking to all the groups and facilitating this discussion. I can never do it remotely. I miss that.
We had our first session here at JPC where persons came in for training, and the technical team did it in inventory management, and you could stay and hear the laughter miles away. It was just a beautiful thing to see, and that human interaction is just priceless in terms of that knowledge share and capture. But going back to the whole matter of working and facilitating flexible work arrangement, this whole matter of monitoring staff is always a big issue for persons. And I know we mentioned the training that persons can avail themselves of based on what was done in Turin from the ILO. The link is in the chat. But there are other time tracking systems persons can utilize, other guidelines for communications, certain things that they can do in terms of regular check-ins. So I think communication will be more key now in a hybrid situation, John, right? And monitoring the outcomes on that time and providing those social interactions. I think that kind of sums up some of the things that we need to look at, right? Is there anything else you would add to that?
Well, I have to mention, I've seen several comments about commuting. And I think that's really important because teleworking began its life as telecommuting. Why? Because the guy, and there was one brilliant man who's still alive, which I've never met. I hope one day I'll get to meet him, before he passes from this earth. He's in his 90s. His name is Jack Niles, and he must be the most amazing guy you can imagine, because this is the mid-70s and he created the idea of telecommuting, commuting by means of telecommunications, back when all we had were fixed phones and big bulky computers. And he created that idea back then. It was amazing. I mean, and you imagine how it's evolved over the generations, and this guy has evolved right with it. I mean, and he is brilliant, but why did he do it? This is why he did it. Commuting, hassle, stress, Southern California, 2 hours, 3 hours each direction, and all the fuel costs and all the hassles and all the misery associated with that commuting. And if you could do it remotely from your own home, you could avoid all of that. And so his original idea was that. And by the way, as someone else who I missed the name of earlier mentioned, this is green. Working from home is green, because now mobile working might not be if you're always in your car, but working from home is super green because you just stay home. And I can tell you, I peer reviewed a study once. I can't tell you which study because when you're a peer reviewer, you have to remain anonymous, but I peer reviewed a study of a European country regarding transportation effects of telework, which clearly showed that teleworking part-time substantially reduced transportation use. Individual, and particularly the use of individual forms of transportation, of which cars are the most notable. So cutting pollution, avoiding commuting, and all those benefits that go to the public as a whole, that are captured by the public as a whole. I mean, really, you got benefits for the worker, you got benefits for employers, and you got benefits for the public as a whole, which is why I personally think that this is something which should be widely promoted, but you've got to know how to do it right. Because if you don't do it right, you won't get the results that you need to make it sustainable. And that's what we're trying to do here. I always keep my eyes on the ball, and I know you're focused on productivity. So I'm focused like a laser beam on results today. And I hope I've given a good explanation or some good arguments for why this makes sense. But I repeat, you have to know how to do it right. If you don't, it can be a disaster. And it can be a disaster for workers as well as employers. And full-time is not the way to go, as I've said, and I've said, and I've said. That just doesn't work well. What you need is part of the time in the office and part of the time remotely. And that's the sweet spot. That's what I've said in many interviews that I've done. I've said, this is the sweet spot, partial teleworking. And I'd like to know who the clever person was who came up with this name, decided to call it hybrid work. And when I first read articles in the popular press about hybrid work, I thought, this is hilarious, because this is the same thing I've been saying for years with different words. Partial teleworking, which is what our 2017 study indicated was the best approach. Not teleworking all the time, not working in the office all the time, but getting that mix, that perfect mix of the two together, the sweet spot that gives you the best results, overall.
Right. So I know that, there with each situation, there's a pro and a con, or pros and cons as it relates to working in the office or working from home. But, is there anything that you have seen that helps from an employee perspective, that they can maximize the time in each situation or in that situation, so that, everything goes in the way that in which we would like it to go in terms of improving productivity? Because we know that sometimes there can be distractions, in either situation. What have you seen that works well for employees or employee perspective?
Well, it's very hard for me to tick all those off here, but if you check out the guide I developed, the teleworking during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond, you'll get all the details. And that's not just for the pandemic, that's for the foreseeable future. But what can you do to get the results that you need, to get what you need to make it work? I feel like a broken record, because I'm going to say the same thing again.
Is there any questions from persons?
Concrete results. When I say concrete results, I mean details. You need to know exactly what deliverables. You need a work plan, an individual work plan for every employee. Has to have an individual work plan with specific tasks, deliverables, milestones, and that has to be detailed enough to explain what they're expected to produce. Not just a report, not just a document, not just an overall the deliverable, but what it needs to look like. How you need to ask yourself, what would I like to see? What would be a great result for me? What would I like this deliverable to look like when I see it? And then you need to put that down in writing. In writing, I want a report that looks exactly like this, that addresses the following issues. I want a study, I want a paper, I want whatever you need. I want a short memo that details the following things and the options that we have for address, you know, a particular issue, bang, 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 like you do in the government, in the public sector, and then all the options that you have, you know, and your recommendation. I need specific, concrete guidance from my employees. And if I give them that, then I should get the great results.
For that to happen, you have to have that trust and you have to have those conversations. So communication is very, very key for this to work. And, you know, and we have to, and I think to add to that is that continuous feedback and that continuous check-in to ensure that everybody's still on the right page. So it will take a little bit more and a different approach from the traditional way of leading our teams. But based on what you are showing and this data is showing that it can actually help us to grow and improve our productivity. So we want to explore this option. And, you know, we have run out of time. We do, you know, value the information that you have shared, John, and I know it's close to your bedtime now, but I'm gonna-
No, I need to make dinner. As soon as we get off here, I gotta go out. It's springtime now and make dinner for my wife and I on my barbecue grill.
All
So
right.
you can take the boy, the American boy out of America, but the American's still there. I need my barbecue, and you like your barbecue in Jamaica too, because I've been there a few times. You like your barbecue, you like jerk pork, you like. I love it. Good greasy food. I mean, it's my favorite.
So we'll make sure that's
carbonized greasy food. Yes, I love it.
So I'll ask the co-host to reshare the resources that you mentioned in terms of that ILO workshop. Some persons have messaged asking for it. So we will reshare that link. And we want to thank you, John, for this, for, you know, all this wealth of knowledge that you have shared with us today. And no time wouldn't allow us to kind of, we could take weeks on this. And we do appreciate you sharing your knowledge, skills, and expertise in this conversation. And something tells me that this won't be our last time. You know, we are now, you know, linked and now part of the productivity family. I want to thank you, our listeners, for joining in. David, for your comments as well. David is a longtime friend of the JPC and also the president of the Jamaica Employers Federation. So thank you for your comments and discussion. Thank you, Stacey. And yes, we're going to share that with you, Stacey. And so remember to save the chat so you can have these resources and information that we have shared. And we also want to thank those who sponsored us, the Hugh Lawson Sharer Studies Institute and the Flow Foundation for facilitating that we could have our full discussion. So John will not continue to have nightmares about us not having this full conversation. So you have redeemed yourself, John. And we just want to tell you about our activities coming up. We have World Productivity Day on June 20th. And we want to also invite you to those conversations. It will be jam-packed with resources and even further information on this whole matter of work from home and flexible work arrangements and hybrid arrangements. So you don't want to miss that. We also have our innovation competition. You know, please share that information out with persons so that they too can be a part of it, or you can see the information on our website as well. So, you know, we are to be in ISO 9001 certified. So we do value your feedback so we can continue to improve. So you see the link in the chat. Please give us your feedback on how you thought, what you thought of this session. And, you know, we want to, you know, thank you all and, you know, our co-hosts, hosts, everybody for helping us to make this possible and for everyone to really have most productive period, right? So thank you again, and until next time. Good job, John.
Thanks, Tamar. I'm starving. I need to go make dinner now.
Please
I'm
go. We don't want
really
you to evaporate.
I'm really starving. Yeah?
All
Yeah?
right. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
We'll
man.
be in touch.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, man.
Take care.
All right, John. Take care.
Oh, yeah.